I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
Lie down on the analytic couch, close your eyes. Dr. Gartner and I are here to help you navigate your feelings, fears, and reactions to the mental illness and political power of our current president. John and I have been talking about him on this show. This is our 58th episode, where we talk about Donald Trump from a clinical perspective. We do review the politics of the week, but we try to do that as best we can through understanding his symptoms. And those symptoms include cognitive decline, which we see in many ways, in his lack of self-regulation, his tangential thinking, his lack of impulse control, which was never a strong suit to begin with, on top of what John and I refer to as his severe personality disorder, which is what we call malignant narcissism, and that involves lack of empathy, criminal behavior, the need to control everything, and the need to punish enemies. Does that just about say it, John?
Yeah, no, very well. That's a good encapsulation. And you know, one phrase that you used is we're watching him amass power as he actually loses faculties, and it really is a kind of extraordinary. You know, I'm looking at the curve. You know, in science we like to do a lot of charts and graphs. You know, I'm seeing these two lines crossing as he's amassing more power, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today, especially with regards to the Supreme Court. But at the same time, we're seeing more and more evidence of his deterioration, and it's a very shocking and frightening combination.
And his deterioration is not affecting his base. It's not affecting the behavior of his the legions of Republicans in Congress who are scared of him, who are cowed by him. It's not affecting world leaders who he's intimidating and basically blackmailing and threatening. But we're still seeing the deterioration happen. And I agree with you, John. It's almost like a kind of a race between how much power can he get while he has less and less ability to process information and to express himself.
Well, I mean, as he becomes even more recklessly deluded, the controls around him are dissolving, so that there's really virtually no barrier between his having an insane thought and committing an unspeakable action. Yes.
And as we've talked about, he believes every thought he has is golden. So he doesn't, It's another reason why he doesn't self-regulate. Why should he? He's a genius in his own mind. He's a genius in his own mind.
Exactly. Because I've got a very good brain. I got my relative was at MIT. Got a very good brain. When I passed the dementia screening test, they said they'd never seen anything like it. It was incredible. They wanted to write a paper about it.
So our first topic has to do with Ukraine, and we have watched Trump vacillate, mostly supporting the Russian position and echoing the Kremlin talking points. But lately, Putin has been getting very aggressive, terrible attacks last night in Kyiv, hitting residential areas with drone strikes and making some progress on the eastern front of the war. But he's interfering with Trump's ability to make peace and get the Nobel Peace Prize, which he talks about, I hear, all the time. But before we even get to the issue of his getting annoyed and threatening Putin, he was undercut by the brilliant Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who we first noticed on this show on the Saturday team of Fox and Friends, where, according to his colleagues, he used to show up drunk. And it turns out that last week he decided to pause sending arms to Ukraine without telling the White House. Hegseth left Trump in the dark when he paused Ukraine weapons shipments, according to a report. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did not inform Donald Trump or the White House before authorizing a pause on the delivery of weapons to Ukraine last week. CNN cited 5 sources who revealed that Hegseth's decision sparked an internal scramble within the Trump administration to understand why it was made and to explain the Pentagon's actions to Congress and to the Ukrainian government. It was reported on Wednesday that the rationale behind the pause was that the U.S. defense officials had become concerned that weapons stockpiles were too low as they looked to divert arms to Israel to help it take on Iran. The move came at a time when Ukraine was facing intensified attacks from Russia against its civilians, meaning the withholding of American assistance threatened to weaken Kyiv's ability to counter deadly incoming ballistic missile assaults. Trump repeatedly told Hegseth to restart the shipment of at least some munitions to Ukraine after hearing the news last week, specifically interceptor missiles for Patriot air defense systems that were already in Poland awaiting delivery. Now, this never happens. I mean, it never happens. And remember, this is the guy, Pete Hegseth, who it's known has a drinking problem, has poor judgment, ran 2 veterans organizations into the ground, spending all their money on entertainment. He lied to the Trump transition team about the woman who had accused him of rape, an employee. That they weren't happy about that. Then there was Signalgate, which he did twice and lied about. And now he made a unilateral decision in sending arms to an ally that the president didn't know about. And the press, to be fair to the press, was really on it. By the way, in that piece that I just read from you, it's from The Independent. And I don't know if you noticed, but it said CNN verified with 5 sources. Part of the consequence of Trump suing the media is they're starting to back up what they say with more sources so that they can't sue. And that might actually be, it could be one good effect of Trump's attack on the press. Anyway, so here's the first.
Wait, can I just say one thing though about this? Because I think this is so. I think there's so many layers to this. I think it's really, really complicated. Because, well, first of all, by the way, when you listed all of Hegseth's offenses, at first I thought you were listing his qualifications. It's like, well, he organized this criminal enterprise, like it was his resume for why he would be chosen. He's corrupt and incompetent. Check. Only after he got sort of 3/4 way through it, I was like, oh, these are things that get him in trouble because they embarrassed Trump, right? They made him look like an amateur. They made him look bad, which is the unforgivable sin, right? That gets you thrown out. But right. I think that one of the things that needs to be recognized here is, Trump gives his capos, because he doesn't really micromanage, because he's incapable of containing, he's incapable of holding a whole thought for more than a few moments. So he's not exactly going to micromanage these complex operations. So what he does is he puts his goons in charge of it, his capos, whatever. He says to Elon Musk, he tosses him a chainsaw and says, look, just try not to get too much blood around the place. All right. But really, he knows what he's up to. And when people hue and cry about it, he just sort of throws up his hands. Well, that's Elon. Just like he really didn't seem to care that much about Signalgate, really. But what he does care about is the deeper mission, which is the coup. Okay. And so what Hegseth was given was an overall set of instructions, right, to sabotage Ukraine, right? Because Trump's still more on Russia's side than not on Russia's side. But as you've pointed out, because there's no honor among thieves, and so these gang leaders have a way of turning on each other. Now that he's got an idealization of himself as the person who's going to win the Nobel Prize. That's how he spelt it, by the way, Nobel. Just so he wants to win the Nobel Prize. And by the way, now that Benjamin Netanyahu has nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize, we know he's got to be a shoo-in, because there is simply no one who represents peace to the international community more deeply than Netanyahu, who's being hailed as a genocidal war criminal. So I don't know if a letter of recommendation from him is really going to get you in. Just saying. So, but your larger point is that the dynamic, and you're going to show this video between him and Putin is changing, right? But I think that and now he wants Putin to back off a little bit, because he wants to be seen as the peacemaker. So he wants to have some more control over this, and Putin is actually doing the opposite. He's pouring on the juice, and so now Trump is actually getting upset with Putin. But I think that what Hegseth did so stupidly is actually what he was really told to do. It's just that he did it in a way that made Trump look dumb, because he is, and doesn't actually know what's going on a day-to-day basis. And that was his sin, if that makes any sense.
I think it's a plausible description. I think, though, just to go back to your great idea that, Hegseth is incompetent and corrupt, and that's like two things that Trump is looking for. But the third thing is loyalty. Mm-hmm. And loyalty means you don't make me look bad. Mm-hmm. Right? Make America great again is just make me great again. That's really what it's for. That's all Trump cares about. And so, and also, Hegseth is showing that he's not loyal. He does what he wants. He lies. He's just, and Trump, I understand, was not happy about Signalgate. Uh-huh. He was actually quite angry about it. So I think that Hegseth is twisting slowly in the wind. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. But we're going to show you the first clip when Trump is asked about the delay in shipments.
President, you have sent more weapons to Ukraine, as you said last night. Last week, the Pentagon paused some shipments of weapons to Ukraine. Did you approve of that pause?
We want to put defensive weapons because Putin is not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people. So we're sending some defensive weapons to Ukraine, and I've approved that.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
Yeah, Harry, as much as I really experienced great relish in the thought of Pete Hegseth twisting in the wind, right? It's only like it gives me a visceral feeling of pleasure in my body. What actually gives me some dread is who they're going to replace him with, because at every stage, right, he manages to replace someone with someone even more effectively evil.
Who do you have in mind, John? Who are you afraid of?
Who do you think? Take a guess. Who do you think he might choose next?
My first thought was Laura Loomer, but I know you're going
to get even more corrupt and incompetent. No, that would make sense, right? You have to keep going down the evolutionary scale, right? But
but I know you're thinking of Michael Flynn.
Yeah, think about choosing someone like Michael Flynn, right? Someone who's unflinchingly loyal and unflinchingly fascistic, right? And not afraid, to use all of the power, of the military against the American people. If he picked a Michael Flynn is actually not incompetent compared to Hegseth anyway. He's actually frighteningly competent, but equally corrupt.
Oh, much more dangerous. Much. So
that's what I worry about is not that having someone incompetent as the Secretary of Defense doesn't produce its own dangers, like sending out our attack plans on Signal, and God knows what, he's probably just a sieve of intelligence information. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're probably just following him around, listening to his cell phone calls, he's probably just like he's like opening up a vein. for intelligence to just pour out to our enemies. He's tweeting out the battle plans now.
It's horrendous. Let's look at the second Trump take on Hegseth screwing up.
Sir, yesterday you said that you were not sure who ordered the munitions halted to Ukraine. Have you since been able to figure that out?
Well, I haven't thought about it because we're looking at Ukraine right now and munitions, but I have not gone into it.
What does it say that such a big decision could be made inside your government without you knowing?
I would know. If a decision was made, I will know. I'll be the first to know. In fact, most likely I'd give the order, but I haven't done that.
That's a very disorganized answer, isn't it? What
I love about it is it reminds me of that person where the person says, hey, the neighbor says, when I lent you my bucket and when you returned it, it was damaged. And he said, look, I never borrowed your bucket and it was damaged when you lent it to me. He says, well, wait a minute. He says, you said you don't know who ordered the pause on the shipment. How did that happen? He goes, well, I haven't really thought about it. So he hasn't really thought about the fact that he didn't know. And then he goes, well, then what does it mean that you don't know who makes those decisions? He goes, no, I would know. Any decision, I would know if any. So he contradicts him. He doesn't know who made the decision, and he hasn't thought about it. But if a decision were ever made, he would be the one to make it, and he would know.
I would be the one that made it. So, he's not answering the question, which he doesn't want to answer. I mean, right. It's not just that he's confused. He doesn't want to answer the question.
Actually expert doublespeak. I mean, in some ways, I think that he may be, and I don't compliment him very often, but he may be the most talented person at speaking out of both sides of his mouth.
Yeah, exactly. And
he's like a ventriloquist. I don't know how he does it.
No. It's because he does. You know what it is? It's doing and undoing. Well, I haven't thought about it, but if the decision is made, then I'm the one who made it. So I'm the one who made it. Well, but who made the decision that you didn't know about? Right?
It all gets mishmashed. It really is like the neighbor saying the thing about the bucket, but then really trying to sell it. Look, I didn't borrow it. It was damaged when you gave it to me. Okay, how many times do I have to tell it to you?
Right. The press is getting really good at asking hard questions in a very kind of normal way. Like that guy went at it twice really well, but Trump weaseled out of it. Joe Scarborough this morning played that clip and said that it was a message to Pete Hegseth. If a decision is made, I make the decision. That it was a warning to him. Right. That may be overreading. Because Joe Scarborough doesn't see Trump as crazy as we do.
Yeah, well, he will. The other thing beyond the Hegseth mini drama, though, and the more important issue is the drama going on between him and Putin. And as much as I've always said, he's Putin's bitch, and beginning, middle, and end of story, I think now he is asserting himself. Okay, it's like it's like. Listen, Bugsy brought you up in this game. He goes, yeah, well, that was then, but I'm taking over now. See, so he's flexing his muscle. Okay, and some of this back and forth with the weapons, you almost see Hegseth could almost be forgiven for being confused as he's going either colluding with Russia or getting annoyed with Russia because they're not going along with his Nobel Prize plan. Then he gets into now we're going to send weapons, and now we're going to have sanctions, and now we're going to send them Patriot missiles. So he's going back and forth as it affects his mood with Putin. You see what I mean? So it's much more fluid and impulsive. I had a conversation with Putin. He gave me a lot of bullshit. Send those. You didn't send the missiles already.
John, let's play the clip and then talk about it. Okay, let's just take a look at it. So this is Trump talking about Putin over the last week.
We get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
Do you want to sanction him? Lindsey Graham has a sanctions bill on Russia. Do you want him to move ahead
I'm
with
looking
that?
at it, yeah. No, I'm looking. The Senate is passing and passed a very, very tough sanctions bill. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
And you'd sign that?
It's an optional bill. It's totally at my option. They passed it totally at my option, and to terminate totally at my option. And I'm looking at it very strongly.
And now that's threatening Putin.
Yeah.
That's saying I can, he's authorized the Senate to do it. The Senate said they'll have it passed in a week or so. And it's interesting. He said that he's very nice, but it's meaningless. That's a very intentional put
Right.
down. Fascinating to watch him turn. And John talks about Trump being a kind of an agent of Russia, and I've always believed that Putin has dirt on Trump. That Trump is afraid of stuff being exposed. But one thing we have to think about is, as Trump becomes more and more convinced that he's all powerful, he's going to care less and less what Putin can do with it. I mean, if Putin exposes some corruption, some money laundering, Trump thinks, well, I'll just say it's not true. What's with it? So Congress is going to impeach me. There's no one's going to prosecute me. He has less and less to fear from Putin than he used to.
Well, that's true. Harry, I think if they release the PP tape, it would be fine. It'd be fine. I don't think it would really change anything.
No, he'll say, well, it's not me in the tape. That's just an AI.
Lie. Even though it'll be obvious.
It's like obliterating Iran's nuclear program. He just keeps saying
it is because I say it is. It's a not I think therefore I am. It is because I say it is. It's kind of it exists because I think it exists because I think it. Not I think therefore I am. The universe exists because I think it.
Well,
but you're right.
The truth is what I say. Yeah, the truth. Yeah. The truth is what I say it is. I mean, that's really it, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's even. But I think it. Therefore, it is. That's what you're saying about him is his grandiosity. If he has a thought, it has to be true. Right? It has to be. It has to be true. But so you make a good point. Putin really has less on him, right? And it really does anything he exposes he could absorb. Actually, I believe. I don't think there's anything actually that could come to light that would dislodge him. But at the same time, actually, in some ways, this is a lot more frightening. I thought that Donald Trump being a Russian asset was the worst that it could possibly be. Like that, it couldn't get any worse than that. But I was wrong, because if Donald Trump starts to think that he's a Putin rival, okay, if this is the moment when Hitler says to Stalin, "We're not friends anymore. All those little sweet nothings you spoke into my ear, now I realize we're meaningless. And I feel so powerful that I feel I can take over all of Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. Because I'm so grandiose and insane, I think I can take over everything." Well, that's actually a very dangerous place for Trump to be. I mean, think about it. World War I still don't understand that whole how World War I got started because some guy got assassinated on a bridge, but things have a way of getting out of control, right? And dominoes. We actually could be in a position where something could get out of control through a miscalculation, through a crazy, demented order.
I think you're absolutely right. But the one place I disagree with you is that Trump doesn't want to invade Europe. Putin wants to invade Europe. Putin wants to invade Poland. Putin wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. And if Trump is getting pissed because he wants the Nobel Prize and because suddenly he feels betrayed by Vlad, is realizing, if Vlad dumps dirt on me, so what? There's no Justice Department that's going to come after me. The Supreme Court says I'm immune from anything, and I can just tell the public it's not true. So he's starting to realize he's bulletproof.
Yeah.
And maybe that means maybe that means he pushes against Putin and Ukraine doesn't get served up on the chopping block, which is really what's been happening on and off since he he became president. So maybe there's a good outcome to this, but the audience loves to tell me how naive I am, and I may be naive here. We'll have to
That
see.
is true. That's true. Well, I think what's scary is it's like a jump ball. It's like, do you remember the Grand Dictator with Charlie Chaplin? And he's imitating Hitler, and he's got this giant globe, but it's like a kind of a balloon, and he's just tossing it casually up in the air, as if the security of the entire planet is just a plaything to him, And I think that at this point, I keep thinking about that, right? Because he's becoming more disinhibited, and you're right, more grandiose. He's feeling more like he can do whatever he wants, right, and get away with it, and there won't be consequences. And if he thinks that he can do it, and this is a very dangerous place for him to be.
Yeah.
It was better when he was Putin's poodle. At least then we had stability. We had global stability. Now we're really looking at something that could really get out of control.
But that also meant that Ukraine would be sold out and abandoned,
right?
Which I think about Ukraine.
No, not acceptable. Yeah, I agree.
Right. Well, I thought we would revisit this issue of democracy and the encroachment on civil liberties in the courts, with law firms, with the media, and most importantly with ICE. This new militarized wing of the executive branch, with people dressed with wearing masks who don't have to show identification. Somehow we're at this place where we're really in danger. And Bill Kristol has been interviewing experts for the past couple of years on a YouTube show called Conversations. And he had on this week Ryan Goodman, who's a law professor at NYU, a former special counsel in the Defense Department, and a co-editor of NYU Law School's Just Security blog. He's super smart. And I chose a couple of, three excerpts from the long interview, which I urge you all to watch if you have time. But here's a couple of excerpts which I think echo some of the concerns that John and I have been talking about and our guests have been talking about on the show.
The weaponization of the Justice Department, the weaponization of the White House, there's so many pieces of that to highlight. But the ways in which Donald J. Trump goes after enemies and perceived enemies by using the power of the government, to me, is illustrated in something that I haven't seen anybody else reference this. That might just be that I haven't read widely enough. Just something that recently happened, and I was writing it up. I was just describing it for something, and then in writing it up, I was like, "Oh my God, look at what I'm actually writing! Can you believe this?" Because we've normalized it. And here's what it was: Elon Musk threatens that he will help people primary Republicans who vote for the massive spending bill. He threatens that, and then he threatened it again, and he threatened not just that again, but then he most recently, last 48 hours, threatened that he would create a third party. And what happens? Within 12 to 24 hours, Donald Trump on Truth Social says, "Oh, well, we're now going to use Doge to look into all of the government contracts and support for Elon Musk's companies." And that's just, that's just fucking crazy that the President of the United States is going to try to directly penalize somebody for political activity. Elon Musk is fully within his rights if that's what he'd like to do. And all he's doing there is expressing political views and using his political muscle. And the President of the United States, it doesn't even do it silently, as Richard Nixon might have done, but he is publicly saying, "We're going to retaliate against you in a way that's unethical, illegal, and the rest of it." And that's where we're at. And when I say that's where we're at, who noticed that? Who talked about that? Did that even get much attention or analysis?
Wow. For a president to threaten an individual and his contracts with the government because he's opposing him politically. Goodman is right.
Well,
It's unheard of, right?
it's unheard of, and now it's been heard of, and now it's been normalized. And that's the stair step that's so frightening, right? Because in other words, this really isn't news, and I don't think he's trying to imply it's news. This has been going on for months, right? He's going to punish this network. He's going to punish this company. He's going to punish this law firm. He's going to punish this person. Okay, all because they criticized him or whatever. And the thing is that what really shocked Ryan Goodman was he's writing these words like, yeah, I'm just writing another article. And like, wait a minute. When did this get normalized?
Yeah. It's as he said, it's unethical, it's illegal, it's criminal. It's criminal.
And it's un-American.
behavior.
It's un-American.
Absolutely.
There is one thing that you can say about being an American is from the very beginning, you didn't have to be afraid of the government because of your opinions. Or,
Right.
that's what made America different. They came here from other countries where they were being burnt at the stake for, believing in transubstantiation instead of consubstantiation. And here they could do whatever the fuck they wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Oh boy. All right. Well, let's listen to Goodman on the Supreme Court and other things.
I think the Supreme Court will eventually slap down the administration on birthright citizenship. I think it's going to be a closer call on the use of the military for protection, as long as the administration stays pretty much within the confines of using the military to protect federal functions like federal buildings and maybe protecting ICE agents, though that one, to many legal experts, including myself and Steve Laddick and others, and Liza Goiten, crosses the line. So I think that one to me is a one to watch for. It's the use of the military in other places across the country on pretext and other reasons, because it's really just about a show of force and creating the power structures in the country in a certain direction. I hope that the Supreme Court recognizes that that issue is also a potential precursor to the use of the military and other devices, but especially the military, to interfere with free and fair elections.
That's really chilling. And I would say to the audience, if that stuff happens, we all have to take to the streets. That's the end of freedom. That's the end. It makes this scared little Congress permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you need to keep someone like him in power.
Well, the whole use of the military. I mean, first of all, he's saying he's hoping the Supreme Court will somehow block Trump's basically sort of inching towards martial law. But so far they haven't, right? So far they actually they sided with Trump when he used the pretext of anti-ICE demonstrations with really very little violence contained in 2 square blocks that the city felt well capable of managing. They didn't feel they had a civil disobedience problem. They felt that people were exercising their free speech in the public square, and maybe it got out of hand with a few people, but basically business as usual, but with a lot of people, more people than usual, but not any kind of looting, burning, rocks throwing at police. But Trump declared a state of emergency. Basically, this is what he keeps doing: declaring a state of emergency and using that as a pretext to take extra constitutional power, to bring the National Guard in, and then even to bring in the Marines, right? Which is really verboten, to bring in the actual military onto the streets of the country. That's something that we have been against since George Washington's time. There was a debate as to whether we should even have a standing military, because there was such a strong feeling that the military should never be used against its own citizens. And if there was a standing military, the fear was that it was inevitable that it would be used against our own citizens. And it has never been used against our own citizens until now. Yeah, you're right that right now the tanks are just kind of in the streets. They're not like, shooting at people or running people over, but they're in the streets. You've got these masked men. We'll talk about that. Where the heck did that become okay to have a masked secret police who have no accountability because they can't be identified and don't need to show any identification? And the Supreme Court said, yes, Trump was within his rights to nationalize the National Guard and bring them in, and I guess to bring in the military as well. And we're going to talk about the Supreme Court and how actually they've sided with Trump in 12 of the 14 biggest decisions that they've had in this term. The only one they didn't was habeas corpus. For what good it did him. That poor man who was sent to El Salvador for no reason, they said that was unconstitutional because habeas corpus is the core of the rule of law. But Abrego Garcia, they're still torturing the guy and still playing 3-card Monte with him and trying to charge him with other things. But even there, they're evading that order. But that was one they had to do, is what I'm saying. And in every other way, they're pretty much giving him leeway.
Well, John, we're going to talk about the court in a moment. Let's just go to the last clip of Goodman.
This use of ICE agents inside our country, masked agents, heavily militarized, that are in some ways you might think being used against undocumented immigrants, but they're used against everybody in so many different respects. Everybody would then have to prove their citizenship, so it affects everybody down to the T. That to me is one of the biggest concerns, and I'm not sure that the law or the courts are up to dealing with it. I do think that that's one in which public outrage and the ways in which the market responds to it is important.
So again, Goodman is being so smart about it. The danger that the ICE agents will be used to interfere with elections, the fact that they're masked, and John and I were talking about this week. Since when is anyone masked? I mean, the FBI always has their faces exposed, and they always have ID. I mean, there's never, I can't remember, there's never been a time when enforcers have masks on. And, John made a really good point. I'll let him expand on it. But the thing about having a mask on that covers your face is that you have anonymity. When you're anonymous, it frees people's psyches up to be more violent, to be more aggressive, because no one can see that it's you.
Right.
And if you have bunch of people, if you people go out with masks on, you see just what we've been showing you clips of. ICE agents knocking people to the ground, breaking the windows in their cars, hauling off people without grounds for arrest, with no warrants. And this is the beginning of the end.
Yeah, and it's one of the things, when you and I were talking about it, one of the things we're saying is, why isn't there more outrage and resistance and pushback and lawsuits about this mask business? It's a big deal. It's a big deal. Every authoritarian regime, right, has a kind of shadowy paramilitary, right, that's actually working with the government. And, they're in the shadows, right? They're not accountable. If they beat or kidnap or hurt someone, they can't be held accountable because they don't even exist, or no one saw them, or, every regime has them. I mean, South Africa had their, goon squad, every authoritarian country you can think of. And so we're creating a goon squad. And somehow that's just okay. We've just become one of those countries where masked men can brutally throw you to the ground and throw you in an unmarked car for no reason, because other than that they can. How did that happen? And the other issue that I wanted to mention about it psychologically that you were referring to is, a lot of ways this reminds me of the Stanford prison experiment. For those of you who don't remember, but you probably heard about this in your introductory psychology course, Philip Zimbardo, who actually has been part of the Duty to Warn movement and tragically, died last year. And actually, we were trying to have his partner on the show, and I think we will later, maybe if she's feeling better, to talk about this. But the Stanford prison experiment was one of the most seminal experiments done in that era of the 60s and 70s. And what they were trying to do was understand how people went crazy in Nazi Germany and followed Hitler? How does that happen? How does a civilized country become so savage? And so the three experiments that people point to the most often are the Stanley Milgram experiment, right? Which when at Yale they asked these people to keep raising the shock. They thought they were shocking someone who was failing a test, and they kept being told by the authority, by the guy in the left, to keep shocking them more and more to the point they were screaming and maybe even dying. And it showed how people will obey authority even when they, right before their eyes, there's a knowledge that this is not right. The Ash experiment, where they asked to have 3 lines, and one is clearly shorter than the other 2, and they ask people which one is shorter. They get it right every time, but then you have a couple of Confederates in the room who are working with the experimenter, and they say, no, the shorter one is longer. And like a third of the people change their answer to show how influenced we are by social influences in terms of how we see reality. And then the Zimbardo experiment was, he took these Stanford undergraduates in the basement of the psychology department, said, we're going to kind of do a role play. Half of you are guards, half of you are prisoners. And we're not really giving any supervision or instructions to the guard, except you need to control the prisoners. And what happened is the guards sort of started just kind of freewheeling and making up their own rules. But it's sort of like Lord of the Flies, that degenerates to this place where now the guards were becoming very brutal with the prisoners, very sadistic with them. And they had to stop the experiment 3 days in because it was so outrageous. And the thing is in other words, these were people who in their ordinary lives would never think to assault someone or torture someone, right? These are just normal Stanford undergraduates, but they were put in a role. They were role playing. Now you're a guard. You're not Joe Smith anymore. Now you're a guard. And now you have a mission, and the mission is to control these people. Well, putting a mask on is taking away that person's identity psychologically. It's also taking away their accountability legally, right? So they can really do whatever the heck they want and get away with it. So that unleashes their id in and of itself. But also psychologically, they're being inducted into a new role. Right? We are ICE. We brutalize people because we're getting 3,000 arrests a day, and by any means necessary, we can and should do whatever we need to do. So it's like the Stanford prison experiment, metastasized over tens of thousands of ICE agents who were kind of reproducing that out of control behavior, right? As it kind of gets more and more off the hook.
John, such a nice summary of those 3 experiments that were seminal. And I urge you guys to, pick up your old intro psych textbook and reread them. I do want to make one quick comment as an old psych professor that I am, which is, John referred to the id. Well, a lot of people like to reject and make fun of Freud and diminish him by saying, oh, the ego, the id, and the superego. Listen, Freud was a biologist, and what he was arguing was that we are inherently aggressive animals, that we learn through laws and customs and social contract not to enact violence upon one another. And there are always people in every society that do it anyway, and they're usually labeled criminals. If the country has to go to war, then soldiers are taught to think of the group as primary and to kill and be killed in battle. Human beings and women, even though women weren't soldiers until recently, they're just as susceptible. They can be just as deadly, just as powerful. Mm-hmm. And Freud was saying we have to be mindful of our natures. And John is really, I would just take his point and say, if you take people and you have Stephen Miller saying every group has to be 3,000 arrests a week. One thing that Trump did was he took away temporary protective status for immigrants who had the right to be here. He rescinded it, then arrested them all and sent them off into prisons. That's what he did to get those numbers up. And if you ask people and you give them access to weapons and the permission to inflict violence and the anonymity to inflict violence, the aggressive nature of human beings will emerge. We're also capable of love and morality and good behavior and good intentions. I'm not saying we're all doomed, But I remember I was once in a dinner party where someone said, we descended from the apes. And some really smart aleck at the table said, no. We are apes. We're just fancy apes. And so we have to be mindful of the human nature, which says we can be vicious and violent. And by the way, put someone in a prison, lock them in a prison, they'll get violent really quickly. Go to war, invade another country, then there's going to be murder and rape. It happens every war. Doesn't matter how good you think people are. You put them in a battle and they will murder and they will rape. It just happens.
And one of the very powerful determiners of that is authority, the higher authority. In other words, if a country goes to war, right, we lose our inhibitions about killing if we feel like we're doing it in the service of our country and in accordance with what the authorities are telling us to do. One of the things about the Rwandan genocide, which is one of the horrifying genocides where over a period of like 2 or 3 days, one part of the population sort of hacked another part of the population to death with machetes in large numbers.
A million.
It was because
a million people were killed.
A million. And what started it was the official radio station of the government started broadcasting the orders to kill the Tutsis, telling the Hutus to kill the Tutsis. So in other words, they were literally, the entire population was receiving orders from the central government. Same thing with Serbia, and its atrocities. And so what's important to understand is when the authority tells these people to do bad things, they're going to lose their disinhibitions very quickly, right? And you notice, meanwhile, the alleged justification for these ICE agents wearing these masks is that they've been doxxed. That's what Pam Bondi said in the Senate. We were watching this a couple of weeks ago. And actually, Senator Peters didn't actually challenge her on this. He was just challenging her on why don't they identify themselves. But he said they're masked. They're not identifying themselves. So if they try to throw you in a truck, shouldn't you resist? Isn't that what a normal person would do? They has no way of knowing these people are actually federal authorities. But she said, well, they have to wear masks because they've been doxxed and they've been persecuted. And bullshit. Why isn't anyone challenging that? How many of them have been doxxed and persecuted, between 2 and 0? Meanwhile, thousands of people are being brutalized in the streets, and yet we're accepting this.
How could anyone let her say that? That is like the most, it was the worst case of disingenuous fascist talk. Right. Oh, we have to. We have to. What else can we do, John? We have to wear masks and be marauders and beat people up and disappear them.
Right. And so I'm sure some of these people were pigs to begin with, but they're now being socialized into a system that is where they are being organized and ordered to behave in this bestial manner. You know what I mean?
But John, it goes on in almost every culture, right? Think of the Soviet Union, and they murdered millions of people and had gulags. It goes on in China. There was the Japanese atrocities against the Chinese in World War II. South America, the juntas in Argentina and Chile. This happens, not to mention the Nazis, and also in Serbia and the ethnic cleansing of Muslims. It happens everywhere. When authorities have too much power and they get populations to murder, populations will murder. They will. Yeah. This is who we are, right? But as I said, it's not all of what human beings are, thankfully. But it is a consistent feature of humanity.
But when you have a malignant narcissist at the top of society, right, then you're going to get Nazi youth. Then you're going to get brown shirts. Then you're going to get people, young Germans who were probably very wonderful, decent people becoming part of a genocide machine.
Right. Look how we've seen MAGA spread as an ideology of sorts. It's a stupid ideology, but it's a slogan. Yeah. It's a couple of slogans.
Right. Well, as we like to say on this show, well, that's really bad, but it actually gets worse.
Sorry, folks. We just went on a tear, but it's been a stressful week.
That's right. We really need to really ration our outrage because there's just so much to be outraged about.
We have to pace ourselves, John. We have to pace ourselves.
We have to pace ourselves. We have to get a runner's pace here. But we're talking about the way in which the justice system is failing us in the enforcement end. I think that one of the things that has really been so discouraging is how the courts, especially the Supreme Court, are failing us. We've been saying for months since the election, right, that there really were certain fallbacks, certain checks and balances that were still in place, right? But as things sort of started to go bad, it sort of came down to, look, it may just come down to the courts and the people, because Congress is useless. The press is kind of being cowed to a certain extent. These law firms are being, cowed. He's, basically decapitating everyone in the federal government. So there isn't a head of any department that can say anything other than, yay for ivermectin. So I think that now that we've seen how the Supreme Court is operating in this first 6 months of administration, I think it's very, very dire. So it's a little bit long here, but let's go over this review of some of their decisions. Supreme Court's expansive view of presidential power is, quote, solidly pro-Trump. President Donald Trump may not have a perfect rubber stamp in the U.S. Supreme Court, but he is finding little willingness by the 6-justice conservative majority to stand in his way. As the justices begin the traditional summer recess, the sweeping impact of their judgments from the recently concluded term, in 56 cases argued and more than 100 matters from the emergency docket, is coming into focus for the administration and the country. Despite the nation's narrow political divide, the court delivered rulings disproportionately advantageous to the interests of the Republican political establishment in power. Time and again, the Supreme Court came down on one side, and so solidly so on the very conservative side, said Ervin Chemerinsky, a constitutional scholar and dean of the UC Berkeley School of Law. Most notably, the court imposed dramatic new limits on the ability of federal judges to check presidential power, coming 1 year after it established sweeping presumptive immunity for presidents engaged in, quote, official acts. In 14 other emergency appeals Trump brought to the high court, the justices granted his request, at least in part, on 12 occasions. So that's 12 out of 14. The conservative majority gave the green light to the Trump administration's mass layoffs of federal workers and the removal of openly transgendered service members from the U.S. military, deportation of non-citizens to third countries with little due process, and access for DOJ staffers to Americans' most sensitive information held by the Social Security Administration. The court did narrowly block Trump's request to continue a freeze on $2 billion in foreign aid money owed to nonprofit groups for services already rendered, and denied a bid to dismiss the legal case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland migrant and alleged gang member whom the administration deported to El Salvador in violation of a court order and other alleged Venezuelan criminals. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, in an extraordinarily stark and impassioned language in her dissent in the birthright citizenship case, accused her conservative colleagues of creating, quote, an existential threat to the rule of law, end quote, by frequently overriding lower court judges. Quote, this court's complicity in the creation of a culture of disdain for lower courts, their rulings, and the law as they interpret it will surely hasten the downfall of our governing institutions, enabling our collective demise, she wrote.
Wow.
So this is really dire. They've really, Trump keeps, this is what Trump does. He declares a fake state of emergency, then arrogates to himself powers to violate the Constitution, right, left, and center. And then when a lower court judge says, hey, wait a minute, you can't do that, and puts a stay on it, the Supreme Court says, number one, you're not even allowed to put stays on his illegal behavior anymore. You don't even have that power anymore. And we're going to remove the stay and let him do what he wants. And maybe the court will decide later about the case, but in the meantime, we're going to remove the stay. And in some cases, it's even sort of humorous. It would be humorous if it weren't so tragic. Like one of the stays they removed was the stay on sending a group of poor innocent immigrants to Sudan, where they'll be, tortured and killed. Okay. Then they said, no, actually, you don't need to put the stay on that deportation, because it could be adjudicated afterwards. So, really, I don't know about how you feel about it, Harry, but I would like to have my appeal heard before my execution, not after. I think it makes a difference. The order here makes a difference.
Well, and as of today, you remember we talked about this last week, but the Supreme Court said that federal judges could have a national injunction if it were based on a class action case. And the class action case for birthright citizenship was declared by a federal judge. And so now there is a stay on that, and it will go to the Supreme Court, and we'll see how the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, which clearly protects birthright citizenship.
And yet, Harry, I just want to say I'm not 100% confident that they're going to do the right thing. Even Ryan Goodman there said, well, of course they're going to kick, this birthright citizenship out of court once they evaluate it. That's become the conventional wisdom. Like, okay, they're putting a stay on the stay, they're stopping the stay, but meanwhile, they're going to hear the case. And of course, they're not going to go there. Do you remember when people were saying the same thing about the presidential immunity case?
Yep, I do.
That, of course, right, every pundit's, well, no, that's not going to, people were even shocked they took the case. That was very upsetting to people. Maybe they just need to take the case to kind of their rule on it. And they ruled a completely different way. This is, let's look at what's happening with the federal workers case. Supreme Court allows for mass firings at federal agencies. Victory for Trump in key test of his powers to act without Congress. Okay. So what I like about this is they aren't saying he has the power to fire everyone in the federal government, but they're removing the stay on his firing everyone in the federal government while the case is being heard. So again, it's sort of like that. Well, after the execution, we'll hear the case. After tens of thousands of people have lost their jobs and have had to move on to other jobs, we'll hear whether they were rightfully fired or not.
Well, it turns out that conservative judges have been wanting to build up the executive power of the presidency for the last a couple of decades. And one of the things they've been wanting to get their hands on is allowing the president to fire workers in different agencies set up by Congress. And so they got their wish with this one, that he can do whatever the hell he wants as president. And the idea is that the Supreme Court believes that there'll be an election in 2028 that will be that will be legitimate and won't be reflecting a takeover by Trump, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like they believe that they're doing good things for the ages, because they believe the presidential power should be this strong, and it's the worst thing they could do. Everything they do to encourage this guy is putting the republic in danger, and it's in dire straits.
No, they're making America shitty again, okay? Because this is how it used to be before the Civil War. All the federal jobs were patronage jobs. But Ulysses S. Grant changed that, okay, in like 1870 something, right? And made it the law of the land that the federal bureaucracy was a meritocracy. It was not something where the next administration should just come in and fire everybody and put in their own cronies. So we're going backwards, like 100 years in terms of the civil service. Okay. More than actually like 150 years. So 150 years that have built up a culture of meritocracy and an apolitical bureaucracy is being thrown back to the 19th century, making America shitty again.
Well, at least we have tariffs,
Yeah, another 19th century innovation. We're living in the 19th century, basically.
I think so. So you had one more quote from Justice Ketanji Brown.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I want to read this quote. It gets back to this issue of why are they removing the stay and letting Trump do the bad thing before hearing the case. Because that's what they're doing. They're not actually saying he can fire everybody, but they're moving the stay on his ability to fire everyone while it is going to be considered, I don't know, next term, later, whatever. But the point is then everyone will be fired already. So here's what Ketanji Brown has to say about it. In my view, this was the wrong decision at the wrong moment, especially given what little this court knows about what is actually happening on the ground. This case is about whether that action amounts to a structural overhaul that usurps Congress's policymaking prerogatives. And it is hard to imagine deciding that question in any meaningful way after those changes have already happened. Yet for some reason, this court sees fit to step in now and release the president's wrecking ball at the outset of this litigation.
Wow.
She's really the one who's telling it like it is. I mean, they all are writing good dissents, but I feel like she's the one who's really putting her finger on it the most prominently, the hardest.
No, she's on fire.
And look, just to fill out, I guess, this point we were making about the militarization, I just wanted to show you this little clip. I'm going to actually narrate some of it because some of it's silent. But what we're seeing here is in MacArthur Park in Los Angeles, a veritable army of soldiers just kind of invaded the park, right? Allegedly looking for illegal immigrants. It's an immigrant-rich neighborhood. But I just want people to see what this looks like. So you have dozens of federal agents are swarming this park. They're marching in formation, and behind them is a whole fleet of officers on horseback. There's actually not that many people in the park, but they're sweeping through the park as if they're having to face a military force. And you can see people are starting to flee a little bit. And then behind the horses, another whole line of soldiers. And now here you see outside of the park, over a dozen tanks in the street. This is what I really wanted you guys to see. 6 months after the Trump administration has started, we predicted there would be tanks in the street. Well, here they are. It's not Tiananmen Square exactly. They're not mowing down students in college, but there are tanks in the street. And there you can see there's also military Black Hawk style helicopters also above the park.
It doesn't look like they arrested anyone. I mean, it's so stupid and feckless. Like, how much of that cost? What do they think they were going to find? 500 illegal immigrant gang members shooting at them?
This Alien and Sedition Act, where he has to basically, with the Enemies Act.
The Alien Enemies Act, which the
Alien Enemies Act,
which the Supreme Court will be ruling on soon.
Right, right. Exactly. You know, it alleges that we've been invaded by an army. And Harry, we have. It's called the American Army. We've been invaded by Trump. I mean, and it's not a joke. I mean, these ICE agents, right, are brutalizing these neighborhoods. They're coming to, as everybody knows, they're coming to Walmarts, they're coming to farms, they're coming to construction sites, they're coming to meat processing plants. They're just dragging people off the street. They're stopping people in their cars. They're doing traffic stops. They're smashing people's windows open and dragging them out of cars. I mean, we are being attacked by an organized military force, our own government.
It's pretty terrible. We're going to move on, though, to just take a few minutes to think about the Texas floods. And I'm sure you've all seen it in the news. There's terrible flooding in Texas, flash floods that, swept away girls at a Christian sleepaway camp and whole families drowned. I mean, the waters would rise in a matter of hours, 20 feet. And the real question was, did all the cuts to the Weather Service, the NOAA, and FEMA by DOGE, did it have any impact on the rescue and alert, this alert and rescue service? And I did a search. I got help from ChatGPT, who's been helping me a lot lately. But it led me to this article from the Yale Climate Review. So I just wanted to show you a couple of things about it. The deadliest U.S. flash flood from a thunderstorm complex in nearly half a century swept through the hill country of Texas early morning on July 4th, killing at least 89 people, including 27 from Camp Mystic, a Christian summer camp for schoolgirls with nearly a century of operations along and near the Guadalupe River. The disaster has raised hard questions about whether short staffing from DOGE-directed cuts and compelled early resignations at the National Weather Service, or NWS, whether that contributed to the disaster. It's true that the Weather Service office at New Braunfels, responsible for the warnings, had lost 22% of its staff. However, the New Braunfels office had, quote, surge staffing for the event, with 5 forecasters instead of the usual 2 working, according to the Associated Press. And as Bob Henson and I wrote in our previous post, the Weather Service performed admirably, issuing the proper watches and flood warnings. But we're pushing our luck if we think the cuts to the NOAA, which oversees the Weather Service, won't cause a breakdown in our ability to get people out of harm's way in the future. In particular, the loss this year of many of the Weather Service's most experienced leaders, people with decades of experience in the particular weather vulnerabilities in local areas, poses a significant danger to the mission of protecting people and property. As Bob Henson and I wrote at the beginning of the hurricane season, massive staffing losses at NOAA from firing of probationary employees, DOGE buyouts, and early retirements have left at least 8 of the 122 National Weather Service's offices unable to operate around the clock because of the loss of staff. Regular twice per day upper air balloon soundings, which are typically the most important ingredient in making reliable model weather forecasts, have been lost from about 18% of the nation's upper air stations. Some locations have been reduced to once per day launches, and a number are doing no launches at all. The Washington Post reported that for the month ending on May 26th, 17% of all U.S. balloon launches that should have occurred have not, mostly because of NOAA staffing losses. Although it appears that lack of balloon data did not have significant detrimental impact on the Texas flood forecasts, it is a certainty that this level of data loss will cause significant degradation for some forecasts of extreme weather events, potentially including hurricanes making landfall along the U.S. Gulf and Atlantic coasts. The other thing that they reported was that coordination capacity may have been weakened because several key roles like the warning coordination meteorologist and the science and operations officers were vacant. And these positions are considered vital for liaising with local emergency managers during crises. So I'm sorry to go through this whole thing with all of you, but really, I think we dodged a bullet. I think we didn't see the vulnerabilities fully from these cuts, but this is only the first of many weather crises coming over the next months and during hurricane season.
Harry, look, authoritarian governments are always really bad at their jobs, right? Try to get anything done by the bureaucracy in Russia, right? It's that nobody's really working. They're all just faking everything. They're just sending the forms in, signing whatever, just trying not to get into trouble with the dear leader. Okay, so look, everything's going to get shittier. Okay, everything's going to become more incompetent, more inefficient. It's going to be harder to do everything, from getting a driver's license to having your plane not crash. And you know what? So what? It's not going to matter because people are just going to, okay, more people will drown. Okay, well, listen, hundreds of thousands of people died of COVID. Yeah, apparently, so what? And so what I'm saying is it's going to happen, right? But when it happens, they'll just, what they were questioning Kristi Noem, and they're saying, well, what about these hundreds of people who died? And she said, well, I'm just all excited about the people who didn't die. I think that really should look. We saved 99.9% of the population. I think we deserve like a commendation. I mean, they're going to spin it, or it'd be. And then another thing she said is, and the other thing she said is, we're having to modernize the weather system because I can tell you the one that we inherited from Biden, it was a broken down, piece of crap, and so we're strengthening NOAA. So they just lie. So they lie. People die, and it doesn't matter.
Well, last week, they weren't trying to destroy Medicaid or hurt Medicaid in the big, beautiful bill. They were strengthening it. And Mitch McConnell, who voted for the damn thing because he's useless after destroying the judiciary, now he's fading out. And he said, oh, people have been kicked off Medicaid. They'll get over it. That was his response.
They'll get over it like it's a hurt feeling.
Closest thing to let them eat cake that I've heard from an American politician.
Yeah, it's a very let them eat cake kind of statement, isn't it? So callous.
So you want to take us through Trump's mind as he rambles through a cabinet meeting?
Yes. So I'm warning people, this is a very long article and we're going to read the whole thing. Okay. And I want to explain why. Beforehand is one of the things that we have been railing against and complaining about, right? Ad infinitum, to the point where you're sick of hearing us talk about it, is how the press is not covering Trump's cognitive decline. And one of the ways they don't cover it, or one of the reasons they don't cover it, is because they give you little curated snippets of speech, right? He does, not everything he says is completely tangential and nuts, right? So they give you the pieces that are relevant. Maybe there's a glitch here or there, but it's integrated into a piece, a slicker, fast moving piece that then moves on to the next thing, whatever. But where we really saw Trump unraveling, right, was in these campaign appearances where he'd be on stage, in front of a camera for an hour and a half. And he would start to ramble, about Hannibal Lecter and make up quotes from Robert E. Lee and,
Sharks. Don't forget the sharks.
Don't forget the sharks and, I'd rather be eaten by a shark than be electrocuted. And he would start to talk about crazy stuff, right? Well, one of the things that we complain about is, hey, show the whole reel, right? Show the whole discursive, kind of discombobulated sort of speech. Well, somebody did that in the Washington Post. Okay. They talked. And so what I want to say is that what we're going to see in this article is not, and this is important, it's not frank thought disorder. It's not a gross example of dementia. It's more what I would call soft thought disorder. Okay. He's rambling in these irrelevant ways as he kind of just, his eyes literally move around the room. right? And he's just free associating to everything that he sees. And
Yep.
it's clearly not normal mentation. It's sort of like something you would see in a deteriorating relative, right? Where they just are speaking around in a very concrete way around the topic, literally going around the room and just saying things about the things that they see. So here's the article. We're going to go back and forth because it's so long. In cabinet meeting, Trump takes a golden opportunity to talk interior decor. At the end of a cabinet meeting that had already stretched some 90 minutes with talks of wars and disasters, Trump spent 15 more minutes going through the aesthetic changes he has made in the White House cabinet room. At the end of the cabinet meeting that had already stretched for some 90 minutes, Trump spent 15 more going through, in significant detail, the new paintings he had ordered hung on the walls.
He marveled at the military might pointed at Iran and the Iranians who fled with American bombers in the air. I mean, those machines flew for 37 straight hours. They didn't stop, he said. They went skedaddle. You know the word skedaddle? I mean skedaddle. They dropped the bombs and somebody said, skedaddle, let's get the hell out of here. But the most animating moments came as the meeting appeared to be wrapping up, when Trump decided to give a roving tour that began with the artwork on the walls. He motioned first to a large portrait of Andrew Jackson, a populist president he has long admired. He turned next to a painting of James K. Polk.
He was sort of a real estate guy, the president, a real estate guy himself noted. Trump quickly confessed, however, that while he may have some admiration for the 11th president, the reason for the painting placement had more to do with the size of the frame. I love the frame of those pictures, he said. Look at those frames. You know, I'm a frame person. Sometimes I like frames more than I like the pictures. Really like those frames. He next pointed to George Washington, the original, and to Dwight Eisenhower, a very underrated president who built the interstate system. He mentioned Eisenhower cracking down on immigration, a policy that was so harsh that almost every farmer in California went bankrupt. We have to remember that, he added.
Next up was Franklin D. Roosevelt, a four-termer. If you notice, there are a lot of ramps outside, Trump noted. People say, oh, that's an unusual place for a ramp. It was because of him. He was wheelchair bound, but he was an amazing man. He said a different portrait used to hang there. It was a terrible portrait, Trump said. It was almost like it was done by a child. I used to say, you know, I can't believe that he would have approved of that portrait of himself. He went on the hunt for a new portrait, aided by 6 curators working at the White House. Again, he said he discovered a suitable portrait in a solid frame that would complement the room.
It doesn't work if you have a big frame, a little frame, he said, but it's like perfection. I'm a perfectionist. He pointed to Abraham Lincoln. That was his favorite picture of himself. Then to John Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams. It was appropriate for his portrait to be there, he added, because his family was the first to occupy the White House. He said he also took chinaware and silverware out of White House storage and cleaned it up for display. He installed new drapes in the room, he said. And he claimed that one of the powers afforded the presidency is that he can take any office furnishings that he desires from members of his cabinet. Once he recalled he was in the office of Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I see this gorgeous clock, grandfather clock, the president said. I said, Marco, I love this clock. Look at it. It's beautiful. I said, I'd like to take this clock and put it in the cabinet room.
Rubio initially resisted until Trump increased his demand. He said, all right, what the hell, Trump recalled as Rubio chuckled next to him. So that's his contribution to the cabinet room. Trump then turned his attention overhead to the light fixtures. These lamps have been very important, actually, whether people love them or not, he said. But they were missing medallions. See the medallions on top? They had a chain going into the ceiling. And I said, you can't do that. You have to have a medallion. They said, what's a medallion? I said, I'll show you. And we got some beautiful medallions, and you see them. They were put up there because the lamps look better. He looked around the room for more inspiration to provide additional commentary. We also painted the room a nice color, beige, he said. It's really been something.
There was only one question remaining, he said. Will I gold leaf the corners? He motioned to the crown moldings and pointed out that the painting them is not a suitable option. It won't look good because they never found a paint that looks like gold, Trump said. So painting it is easy, but it won't look right. He turned to Linda McCann, the Secretary of Education, asked her to give an opinion. Oh, I'd gold leaf it, she responded. He asked the room to take a vote. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth agreed with McMahon on the gold leaf question. Eventually, Trump concluded the meeting. It's a very important room, he said. Very powerful room. Great room. So it's just a little meandering ramble in a very concrete way through the free association of Trump's mind as he goes through the decor of the room. It's not frankly demented, but it's not normal speech either.
You know, it's I think this is one of those moments where you can't tell whether it's tangential. It's less so, I think. Whether it's he's so proud of having redecorated the room that he wants to talk about it like he's 8 years old. Like, I did this and I did this and I did this, and there's no self-regulation. There's no sense of, is this presidential? There's no sense of, does anyone really want to hear about it, right? It's all just this kind of rambling associations. And I think the real problem for me is he's too comfortable with this. Right? He doesn't, it's fine that he does this in the middle of press conferences. Remember he talked about the refurbishing of the Oval Office when he was about to attack Zelensky. He did the same thing. He's doing
the cabinet meeting.
Yeah, he does it all the time.
And he does it all the time. And I think here's the thing is, look, we're 6 months into this administration. If we're correct, he has a deteriorating cognitive problem, right? And what we're seeing is the normalization of it. And because it's happening gradually, we're like the boiling frog. We just get more and more used to more and more rambling, tangential, self-referential, confabulatory, what have you, and we just kind of go along with it. And of course, he's picked this cabinet of toadies, right? So if Trump really were to become so incompetent that he needed to be removed under the 25th Amendment, is it going to be done by these people who are going, oh, I would gold leaf it. Oh, yes, President. I think that's a wonderful idea. I mean, the most wonderful president in the whole world, your portrait should be here. Man, we should have 20 portraits of you here. So with these worshipful toadies, right, as he starts to deteriorate more and more, right, and express more frankly, right, in a more florid way, his thought disorder, I think they're all just going to nod their heads with a stupid fake smile on their face.
Absolutely, especially Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education who ran a worldwide wrestling organization.
Right. It's the Secretary of Ignorance, really, but
you can't make this stuff up.
Can't make this stuff up. So anyway, I just want to make this point because the press is not looking at these things, but I wanted to congratulate the Washington Post on this long form article where they really exposed the rambling, kind of irrelevant, discursive nature of his mentation, but also seeing it in the cabinet. This is the group that would have to remove him, right? And what we're realizing is it's never going to happen.
Never.
Right?
Never.
No matter how inane and thought disordered he is, no matter how crazy the things are that he says, they'll just smile stupidly and go along with it.
Yes. So, John,
yes.
What time is it?
Well, I guess we've gotten to the shrink wrap portion of the show. What have we learned this week, Harry?
John and I seem to have switched places. I tend to be more pessimistic these days, and even he is. You know, I've known people, I've had relatives who have gotten a difficult diagnosis, medical diagnosis. It doesn't mean that it's a terminal cancer, but they're given a diagnosis of something that is it's life-threatening and significant, changing their life. And their first experience is shock, and then what I've found is that people start to say, but I'm not dead. And I have more tests, there may be procedures, I might have chemotherapy, but I'm alive. And I'm going to keep reading books, and I'm going to keep talking to my friends, and I'm going to keep watching reruns of the Gilmore Girls, and I'm going to do all the things that I like to do and take pleasure in, with the knowledge that there's a process coming up that could be life-threatening, that you're going to have to face that surgery or that chemotherapy or that whatever it is, right? And I feel like that's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
We have enough freedom to do this show. We have enough freedom to travel. We have enough freedom to love our families and to do our work. And not if you're an immigrant on a who was once on a temporary protected status, or legal immigrants, but right now, and yet, what could be coming down the line, as Ryan Goodman said, right? ICE agents interfering with elections, right? Trump wanting a third term. The Supreme Court backing up his arrogation of power, his amassing of power. So I'm going to say what I would say to a friend or a patient, colleague, whoever, who's struggling with a diagnosis of an illness, which is enjoy every day. You have your mind, you have your spirit, you have your relationships. But I also would say to the country is, don't take your eyes off what this guy is doing. Do not take your eyes off what's happening to us politically. Be ready to go into the streets when the time comes. Listen for the call, because this is not going to go well unless there's real resistance from some sectors of our country, whether it's from the people, or more unlikely the courts, or the least likely the Congress.
Well, Harry, I think you're falling down on the job a little bit in your role as an encourager. if your comforting analogy is someone getting a cancer diagnosis, like, well, I want to make the most with the few months I have left.
I didn't say it was a terminal diagnosis.
Like, look, it's not over yet, people. And now it's like, let's just make the most of the time we have left.
I didn't say it was a terminal.
That's your encouragement. that's the good news.
Reality is always best. This is what we're facing.
Yeah,
but I don't think it's a done deal. I don't think we are fated to lose democracy. I don't. I think there's
because this new chemotherapy that they've come up with has been shown to extend life by at least 17 days.
Well, I that's where the analogy kind of falls down. But I just wanted to capture that sense that we have freedom now, but they're coming for it. And we have to be prepared to fight for it when the time comes. But I also think we need to live our life as well.
Yeah.
That's all.
No, I agree with that. Sure. No, I mean, I think it was especially with the things happening with the Supreme Court, a discouraging week. We're seeing increased militarization on the streets, and really the removal of any kind of restraining hand, from the courts, and that really is a big deal, because you're right. Then it just comes down to the people in the streets and the people in the voting booth, assuming we're allowed to vote in a free and fair election, which I think is really, we don't know, because they're going to obviously try to make that not happen. And all of this is happening while he's actually deteriorating. So this horrible, split screen, or this horrible graph where we see these two lines crossing, where he's amassing more and more power as he loses more and more of his faculties. And that really is a scary combination.
It is, but I like the idea that maybe his deterioration will also stop him from being effective. I mean,
I've heard that argument a lot. I mean, that's been mentioned many times. I'm actually, because of the perverse way he acts out, I think that even in his diminished capacity, he will find some way to make himself important, feel powerful, express his sadism, right? Grab attention and do something massively destructive to feel powerful. And so, but it'll happen in a way that'll be more disorganized, impulsive, based on some gross misunderstanding of reality. So it's
John, we were supposed to switch places. You're now supposed to say something uplifting and encouraging.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, in the meantime, folks, make the most of the time you have left. Right.
Yeah. There's Netflix. Yeah.
Well, although existentially, our Buddhist guests would say you're right. We exist in the present, right? So be present in the present. We're not dead yet. We may be dead men walking, or not.
No, we're okay.
But we are here. We are here. We are present, and so being conscious and present in the present is a very powerful thing. And the more of us who strive to do that, the more conscious we can all be. And
good things can happen that surprise us.
Yep.
That's
really true too. That's true too.
Okay. After that strange meandering press conference that Trump gave in the cabinet room, where he began to describe all of his interior redecorating, I was actually there. I got a press pass, and I was able to snag an interview with Trump, which I really hoped would last a good 20 minutes, where I could try to reflect on his distorted thinking and maybe be able to underscore it for our audience. But he took control of that interview right away, and he actually ended it abruptly. Let me show you the short clip that we have.
All right. Well, one question from Shrinking Trump. Yeah, what is it?
Mr. President, I understand that the arms shipments to Ukraine were delayed by someone in your administration. Turns out to be Secretary Hegseth. Did you know about it? And when did you know about it?
I don't really care that much about that. But you know what? Look at this. Look what I just picked up here. This is a fork. People don't talk about forks that much anymore. I don't know why they don't want to talk about them, but that's what we used to call them. We used to call them forks.
Forks. What is it about forks, Mr. President?
Well, fork, New York. I won New York by 105 points. They love me in New York. I built up all these buildings. They said I couldn't do it, because I've got a great brain. My brain, I tell you, it runs like a train. Train, choo-choo, choo-choo. But you shouldn't be taking choo-choo trains. You should be taking cars, because cars burn lots of oil, and oil's good. But then we had Elon Musk, and he told us to like electric cars, and then we liked them. But now he's been mean to us, so now we realize electric cars are very, very bad. Very bad, because Elon Musk is very bad. And so they're bad. They're bad. They're ruining our country, and we're not going to let that happen.
I'm not sure how to follow up on all of that. EVs are bad because you're mad at Musk. And you talked about New York because it rhymes with fork, and then told a lie about winning New York, which you didn't do, by 105 points, which isn't even possible.
You think you're a comedian, little shrinking man? Is that what you think? You'll be laughing out of the other side of your ass when I'm done with you. We'll send you to El Salvador. We'll get you a free sex change operation, if you know what I mean. Yeah, you guys that's shrinking Trump are scum. You're scum. And you know what we do is scum. And the press conference is over.
Well, those of you who watch our show regularly, you know that we often end the show with John singing, and which I always find kind of great. And when we were reading the comments, we came across a person who said she had taught singing for decades and that she was really pleased that John was singing because to her it was important for people with no talent at all to sing freely.
It sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I think she really meant it sincerely. That really, if somebody with so little talent could perform with so little criticism, self-awareness, it might liberate other people to just be more spontaneous.
Yes, and you know, one of John's great strengths is his lack of self-consciousness. But someone in the comments wrote, "Why doesn't Harry sing?" And I you know, I thought I'd rise to the challenge, and I was thinking of how Trump is feeling these days with Putin giving him a hard time. So I came up with this song for all of you. You make me feel so glum. You make me feel so small and dumb. For every time you make a move I can't refuse, 'cause you have some dirt on me when Ukraine starts to drone. You only make me squirm and groan. For though I want to smack you down, I just can't face your frown. But you and I, we're just like a couple of thugs, taking down the media or anyone who'd oppose our mugs. You made me feel so soiled. Now NATO knows that I'm your goyle, 'cause you have the tape of the girls urinating on me. And even when I yell at Pete, it doesn't make me feel strong today, 'cause you make me feel so glum. You make me feel so glum.
Oy vey!